So here's the question for you. Is a country truly free if its laws, its schools, and maybe even its culture are still running on an operating system installed by its former colonizer? That is the big provocative idea at the heart of our explainer today as we unpack this lingering ghost of the British Empire in modern India.
Okay, let's just dive right in with a pretty explosive quote from our source material. The argument here is that the transfer of power back in 1947 was, maybe more of a change in who was in charge than a fundamental change in the system itself. This one sentence really sets the stage for everything we're about to talk about. And there's a word for this whole concept, Angreziyat, which basically means Englishness. It's this core idea that the colonial era systems and values, well, they didn't just pack up and leave when the British did. Today, we're going to see how this argument gets applied to India's laws, its education, its culture, and how it all connects to some major stuff happening right now. So here's our game plan. We'll start by defining what this colonial mindset really is. Then we'll look at how it's said to pop up in the legal system, in education, the economy, and finally, we'll get into the whole cultural ethos of the nation. Okay, first things first. What exactly are we talking about when we use a term like colonial mindset? Let's get a really clear definition on the table. So, the crucial point, according to this perspective, is this. The argument isn't really about blaming people. Not at all. It's about looking hard at the structures, the legal codes, the philosophies behind education, the way the administration is set up, that were inherited from that colonial period, and arguably continue to shape modern India. Now, here's where this kind of abstract idea gets really, really interesting. It connects directly to a massive, real-world change in India's legal system that literally just happened. I mean, just look at this timeline. It shows you just how long-lasting this legacy has been. The foundational legal codes that governed India for so long, the IPC and the CRPC, they were British creations from the 1800s, and they stayed the law of the land for more than 75 years after independence. Incredible. And then, boom, in 2024, a total overhaul. The old laws were swapped out for 3 new codes with these Sanskrit-derived names. This move has been framed as a huge, definitive step away from that colonial legal framework, a kind of decolonization of the law itself. But of course, a historic shift like this is never simple. According to reports from NDTV, opposition parties raised some serious concerns. They argued there just wasn't enough debate in Parliament before these laws were passed. They also pointed out that many legal experts were worried, fearing the new codes could lead to something they call bulldozer justice. Okay, let's switch gears. Now we're going to see how this same argument about a lingering ghost is applied to another really critical area, the education system. Our source material paints a picture of 2 completely different worlds here. It claims that the indigenous Gurukul system was actually really sophisticated, focusing on practical sciences and even had high literacy rates. It then argues that the system the British brought in, often called the Macaulay system, had a totally different and, you could say, a much narrower goal. And this is the quote you always hear that's supposed to sum up that goal. The argument, basically, is that the colonial education system wasn't just about teaching reading and writing. No, it was a project of cultural transformation, designed to create a class of people who would be loyal to the empire in their very soul, even if they weren't British by birth. So, this argument then flows from minds to money. The claim here is that colonial-era habits, patterns of consumption, were put in place that continue to have a major economic impact, even today. And to make this really concrete, the source points to everyday habits like drinking tea and coffee. It argues that because these markets are so dominated by multinational companies, their consumption leads to this massive annual drain of wealth from India, to the tune of a staggering 5,600 crore rupees a year. Okay, and this economic point leads us right into what is maybe the deepest, most fundamental part of the whole debate. This idea that there's a clash between 2 completely opposite cultural value systems. This slide just lays it out so clearly. On one side, you have what the source calls the traditional Indian ethos of tyag, that's sacrifice, where greatness is measured by what you give up for the good of everyone else. And on the other side, a Western ethos of bhog, or consumption, where success is measured by what you own, what you accumulate. This quote really just drives that contrast home, doesn't it? It frames the whole debate as a choice between 2 completely different definitions of what it means to be successful and what a society should value most. So, when you pull back and look at the big picture, what does this all add up to? Well, all these arguments about law, about education, economics, culture, they all keep circling back to one huge fundamental question. Did the political independence of 1947 actually lead to a real decolonization of the mind and its systems? Or was it in some ways an incomplete revolution? And that's the question at the very heart of this entire debate, and we'll leave you with it. It's not just some historical discussion, right? It's a live, ongoing conversation that continues to shape India's search for its modern identity. What parts of the past do you keep? What do you throw away? And how does a nation build a future that is truly, authentically its own?